Welcome to the Unfeigned Faith Podcast, where our desire is to encourage each other to live out genuine Christianity in a superficial world. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Now here's our host, Pastor Aaron Richert.
On the 12th of June, a preacher sat down with Pennsylvania State Police and confessed to sending explicit images to a 15-year-old boy. 9 days later, his father stood in front of their church and said, quote, "Pastor Kenny is having a spiritual battle right now. The devil is attacking him." He mentioned battles. He mentioned his mental state. He mentioned having long COVID. 9 days from when he sat down with the police and confessed to addressing his congregation. Now, I don't want to stand over a father's grief and mock it or anything like that. I don't know what he knew on that Sunday. I'm a pastor. I'm a father. I know if it was my son, I would be having a hard time reaching for any sentence in the English language that would soften it, try to bring understanding. But I have to tell you what that statement did. It didn't protect anybody. It made a lot of people upset, as it should have. Because that's what happens when a church has no honest vocabulary for sin. We reach for maybe a medical word or a therapeutic word, a spiritual battle, COVID, anything but he did such and such. And here's why I'm making this episode. Over the past week, I've watched how people are attacking those who are framing it a certain way. No doubt in the past, we've seen people justifying preachers, saying, oh, but they were such a great man of God, and different things like that. And they specifically attack a certain word, and it's a biblical word, and they're saying, stop calling it a fall. Now, I understand why, and I'm going to tell you why I think they're half right, but also why the other half is so important, that we must be biblical above everything else. And I think looking at it from a biblical perspective is going to show us how heavy that word really is. Now, I'm not going to spend this episode on one man's case. It's the occasion that took place here, but that's not the subject. The short version of what prompted this, and by now many of you I'm sure have heard, it's been circulating around, especially in Baptist circles. There's a preacher who's 46-year-old. He met a 15-year-old boy while preaching at this boy's church in Pennsylvania in November of 2024. They exchanged numbers. The investigators say explicit images went out by private message multiple times a week over a year. He confessed to the police in June. He's been charged with 13 counts and 3 of them felonies. Police believe there are other victims. That's all I'm going to say about the particulars of this case, because it's really not about the case. It's about a pattern. It's about things that we've seen. And I really want to pull back the curtains a little bit and give us some insight on how a man gets there, but more importantly, how we can guard ourselves before anything gets mudded, what I'm about to say. That this was wicked. He should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And I also want to say, if you're a survivor listening to this and you've never told anybody, I just want to say you're not the problem. There's nothing wrong with you, and there are people that want to help you. But now I want to talk about the word fall. So here's the pushback. All you have to do is watch the comment sections. I put together a little a reel talking about how it hits me. And every time I hear of a preacher fall into sin, it hits me hard. I look at my own life. I look at my own walk, guards that I have up my own life, because we look up to these people. They inspire us. They are mentors many times. And so as soon as you say, well, this man fell into sin, there's instantly pushback. And, one person said, nobody falls into becoming a pedo. Different phrases like that. And actually, I'm going to push back on that, because I think looking at a scriptural, biblical look at it, that's exactly what we're going to find. But they'll say things like, don't call it a fall. There are people, a lot of them survivors of church abuse, and they say, don't call it a fall. A fall is an accident. It's a stumble. A fall is what you do on ice. This wasn't a fall. This was a year of deliberate choices aimed at a child. And to that I say, you are correct. This was no accident. I've heard it put 2 ways in particular. I heard you don't fall into becoming a predator. And then I heard it this way: if somebody says this could be any one of us, that's a big red flag. On the abuse of that word fall, they're absolutely right. I'm not going to argue with them on that. Many times the same people that say fell or fall are also going to be the ones that are trying to make excuses for the predator or the one that fell. Back in 2012, when Jack Schaap was convicted, roughly 140 letters went to a federal judge asking for leniency. Now, in his case, he was also a senior pastor of a very large, very influential church, and he used his position to start a relationship with a minor, which did land him in federal prison. But most of the people that were reaching out for leniency were describing him as a God-loving Christian leader who had just taken a major misstep. That's how they describe the word fall. They say like one misstep. So when someone says the word fall has been used to launder wickedness, especially in the independent Baptist circles, they're correct. I believe them. We taught people to hear fall as an oops. And quite frankly, that's on us, misusing Scripture or using these words to try to soften things. And so I'm not going to defend the word without first saying the use of it, the way we framed it, has been wrong. So when this broke, I saw a lot of preachers say stuff like this, but by the grace of God, there go I. I said the same statement, and I got pushback. So I do want to be clear, because the whole episode is going to kind of hinge on this idea, but I'm not saying that any one of us might molest a child. I'm not saying that. I don't believe that. If that's what you heard by hearing that, then yes, that is a red flag. All right. I don't blame you for objecting. That would be a very grotesque thing to say, and it would be false. But here's what I am saying. I have a nature, and so do you, and left unchecked, unconfessed, unguarded, the nature is going to take a man somewhere that he never planned to go. Not necessarily down his road, but mine. Whatever mine is, pride, bitterness, greed, lust, temper, a secret that I've decided is nobody's business. See, nobody falls suddenly, they fall incrementally. Now, the destination might be different, but the road works the same way for everybody. The framework is the same, the steps down are the same. So when they say you don't fall into becoming a predator, you're absolutely right. Nobody stumbles into that. It took over a year of decisions. It took many cases a lifetime of repeated behavior till they got to that place. The point is, you never stay where you started. You don't have one step in the wrong direction and then just remain there. It's never content to remain. So here's the distinction. That could be me as a statement about that first step down, not the last one when you got caught. When I say, but by the grace of God, there go I, I'm not claiming that I'm going to end up where he ended. I'm confessing that I'm standing on the same staircase, the same potential to fall that long way down. And the only thing between me and any given step, quite frankly, is the daily grace of God in guarding. He commands me to do so, to guard my heart, to walk in his grace. So we want to start off with 1 Corinthians 10:12, because I think it's so important here, where it says, wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Paul is not saying take heed lest you become the worst man in Corinth. He says take heed lest you fall. And who's the warning to? Those that think they are standing. He said it to men that were still standing, had not fallen, had not had the police report or the investigation. They're from the outside looking in with this condemning look. And quite frankly, all you got to do is look earlier in the chapter to see what he's pointing to. And he's pointing to grotesque sin. And he says these things were an example for us that we don't fall into the same trap. Now, on the statement that was said about this being a red flag, but by the grace of God, there go I, being a major red flag. By the way, the one who said that is the guy that hosts the Preacher Boy podcast. By the way, his own mission is to expose abuses and things that take place in churches. And I understand where he's coming from. I find myself actually agreeing with him more times than not. I don't think he has the right heart in it, honestly. He claims to be an unbeliever or an agnostic, and so I would encourage anybody who listens to him to not take any spiritual advice from him. However, he's pointing out some really good stuff in that he is exposing patterns, and he's showing where a lot of these churches have gone wrong, where preachers have fallen, and quite frankly, he is the result of years, decades of sweeping things under the rug. Thinking that a preacher is too big to fall, thinking that a preacher is too important for the cause of Christ for his sin to be found out. I say there's biblical reason for that, to mark them that cause divisions that are contrary to the doctrines we've received, and to avoid them. We see these admonitions all throughout. Paul pointed out many names of people that fell from sin and been turned over to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme and so forth. But I want to point to something else because I think it's true, and that the sentence alone can absolutely be a red flag. But it depends entirely on what the sentence is doing. So when someone says, but by the grace of God, there go I, what's going to follow? What is the context of the way which he says that? If a man says that could be any one of us in order to lower the consequences, or to soften the sentence, or to shorten the distance back to a restoration or back to the pulpit, then yes, flag it. That is a red flag. Watch him. He's not being humble. He's actually negotiating for what's taking place. But if a man says that, but by the grace of God, there go I, that could be any one of us. If a man says that in order to raise his own vigilance, to go home, to look at his own phone, to look at his own private habits, this unguarded life, that's not a red flag. That's Galatians 6:1. And it's a command that every one of us should consider yourself. Consider thyself, lest thou also be tempted. So here's the test. It's the same words, but it's really opposite hearts. Does it make him more careful, or does it make him more lenient when he says that statement? In fact, in 1 Corinthians 15:10, here's what Paul says. But by the grace of God, I am what I am. And this grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all, yet not I, get this now, but the grace of God which was with me. Paul said that about himself, the man who hunted Christians, not as an excuse, but an accounting why he was anything at all, that it was simply the grace of God in my life. So here's why I want to shift and even push back on those who are attacking the word fall, or this concept, and this is the burden of the episode. The problem is never the word. The problem was that we stopped using it the way the Bible uses it. In everything, and this is consistent with me, this is what this podcast is all about, is what my church is all about, that we must be biblical with everything. Let's define things biblically. Let's go to the scriptures. Let that be our absolute authority. Now, telling a lie is a sin, but that's not a fall. Looking at something you shouldn't be looking at may be a sin, but it's not a fall. A fall is what a lie can become if it's left unchecked, if it's never confessed and dealt with. A fall is when that look is fed for 20 years without a check, and no doubt it tends to grow. So I'm not going to just give up the word that the Bible uses, but I want to take it back. I want to put it in its proper framework and understand why this is such an important word to understand. Because when you use it the way the scripture uses it, calling this a fall does not soften it, does not give an excuse to anybody. It actually makes it heavier. It means that he chose every step on his way down toward that fall. So here's where we're going. We're going to kind of cover three aspects. What the Bible actually means by the word fall, how a man gets to that place, and then a warning for every one of us, lest we also fall. So I want to start with the word itself. I want to begin not with David and his notorious fall, not with Corinth and the warning, but before there were any people at all. The first recorded fall in history, in the universe, it was premeditated. In Isaiah 14, verse number 12, the Bible says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" What happened? This creature fell. And let me just say, that's probably the greatest fall in history. There was no accident. This was a determined thing. "How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" Now, if a fall meant an accident or a slip or an oops, then let's continue reading and see if it still fits. In verse number 13, it says, "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend to the heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." We see all these "I will" statements. 5 deliberate "I will," my desire, my intent. 5 choices, 5 desires that are exposed, which led to a great fall. See, the most premeditated act of rebellion in the history of the universe, and it's the word the scripture uses, is the word fallen. Revelation 18:2, "And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the Great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils." See, that's not an accident. It's the verdict on accumulated wickedness, and it says it has fallen. In fact, it says it twice. Now, the Bible has other words for slip, for mistakes, and it uses them. Here's what convinces me that the objectors, they have it backwards. The Bible keeps some categories separate. In Galatians 6:1, if a man be overtaken in a fault, he uses the word fault. You which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. This was a fault that overtook him, and the idea that he can be restored means that there was something to get picked back up from. Overtaken in a fault, that's the slip. He messed up. And notice the prescription is gentle restoration. It has a word for the daily reality of indwelling sin, James 3:2. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same as a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. It says we all offend every day. As long as we're in this flesh, there are offenses. We have to deal with it. Then it has an entirely different word in Matthew 7:27. And it fell, and great was the fall of it. We're going to come back to that one. But you see, sin is an event. A fall is an entire structure that gives way. Every fall is made of sins, but not every sin is a fall. That's the important aspect. Think about Paul. His own fear, it was not sin in general. It was a fall. 1 Corinthians 9:24-27, it says, now you know that they which run in a race run all. He's given the metaphor of a race, but one receiveth the prize. So run, now he's talking about your spiritual race, that you may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body, and I bring it into subjection, lest by any means, when I preach to others, I myself should be a castaway. The context here is an athlete running, striving, not shadow boxing, not just trying to look the part. And he says, if I do this wrong, I'll become a castaway. The word there means to be disqualified. And he says this, he's going to keep his body in subjection. That keep under is a picture of violence. Yeah, the word means to strike under the eye or to bruise. See, this is not a devotional habit trying to do better. It's a man beating something into submission daily. That's the aggression he's taken. Paul is not talking about Romans 7 here, where he's battling with his flesh. He knew he'd sin as long as he was in this flesh. In my flesh dwelleth no good thing, he said. What he feared was a different category altogether, disqualification, or if I can say it this way, a fall. By the way, these men that we're talking about, these preachers, they're disqualified. They fell. They were cast away. The only restoration they should be looking for is restoration with their walk with the Lord. But they fell. They are disqualified. Paul's fear was a fall, not a fear that he might sin. That's going to happen. And to be clear, castaway is not a loss of salvation. Paul settles that a few chapters earlier there, but in 1 Corinthians 3:15, if any man's work shall be burned, it says he shall suffer loss. But he himself shall be saved, yet as by fire. Talking about his works, talking about the judgment seat of Christ. The man who has nothing to show for it is still saved, because we're not saved by works, we're saved by grace. But he has a loss of usefulness, a loss of rewards, which is exactly the terrifying thing that we have in view. You see, the issue is, if I do all these things, not that God's going to disown me. The issue is I've lost all usefulness. By the way, I'm not going to get into it right now, but the Bible even talks about there's a sin unto death. Be very careful. But then watch what Paul does next. Here's the part I want you to hear, because many of us have only heard 1 Corinthians 10:12 as kind of a standalone proverb. That we take heed lest we fall, and anyone that thinks he can stand. It's a conclusion of an argument that Paul begins right there, as we just read about this being disqualified. And so it says in 1 Corinthians 9:27, lest by any means when I preach to others, I myself should be a castaway. So we jump over to chapter 10. It starts in verse number 1. Moreover, brethren, so adding to this, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all our fathers were under the cloud and passed through the sea, and were all baptized under Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did drink that same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. Get this now, but with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. So he says there's an example here so that we don't lust the way they lusted. In verse 8 it says, neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. And then verse number 11, now all these things happened unto them for an ensamples, a picture, an illustration, that they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore, because of all these verses building up to this, let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Now the wherefore is the most important part. We see all these things, wherefore, let him. Wherefore, Paul expresses that I'm afraid of disqualification. Then he gives you a picture of a nation that had every privilege, every blessing of God, and they fell away. And he says, wherefore, watch yourself. He says, I'm afraid of this kind of a fall. Look at how it happened, and this could happen to you. Now notice, verse 8 points back to a specific instance with the nation of Israel about Baal Peor. See, it didn't start with idolatry. In Numbers 25, 1-3, it says, and Israel abode in Shittim. And the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifice of their gods. And the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. They fell into whoredom. They started fellowshipping, eating a meal. Then they started bowing down, worshiping other gods. Then they joined up with them. And what was the result? 23,000 fell in a single day. And not one of them woke up that morning planning to worship Baal. By the way, it goes out beyond that. When you start looking at Baal worship, you have Baal Peor, you have Baal Moloch, you have all these different Baals, and some of them, they're actually sacrificing their own children. So before you think this is nowhere near offending a child or nowhere near a predatorial type stuff, what else would you call slaughtering innocent children? And that's where these people were. And that's the warning where Paul says, take heed. If you think you stand, take heed. Paul feared disqualification. He says, you take heed because you are made of the same stuff the nation of Israel is made up of. And look what happened to them. In one day, 23,000 fell. You could be one of those 23,000 that would fall. So let me say again the thesis of this episode. Calling this a fall does not soften it. It actually hardens it. It actually strengthens this argument. If a fall is what Lucifer did to descend from heaven, to become what he became, if a fall is what Babylon got, the Babylon the Great, if a fall is a house collapsing on itself, then every step downward is a step somebody chose to take to get to that place. None of that was by accident. Which raises an important question, really the only question. If this is a descent, if it's like a staircase going down, then here's the question, what are the steps? How does a man who preaches faithfully, I'll use that word, how is a man who has such an impact, who seemingly is so used of God, how does he actually get there? Because I can show you the steps, and I can show you where we ought to make sure that we stop. So let's look at how a man gets there. James 1:14-15 gives us the blueprint of how sin works. It says, but every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin when it is finished bringeth forth death. It says they were drawn away, pulled aside, if you would. They were enticed. I always picture like the carrot dangling like in the cartoons. And what's he pulled aside from? His own lust, the desire that he had within himself. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin. Now we have committed the sin. Sin when it is finished, the final verdict of sin is death. And two things. First, we notice the gestation language. It says it's conceived and then it brings forth. Nothing about that is instantaneous. It takes time. Second, notice what it says. He's drawn away of his own lust. Not the devil's, not some woman that pulled you aside, not circumstances. The devil may use those things because he's watching you. He sees what you lust after. He knows the patterns in your life. The enticement implies an enticer. But at the end of the day, make no mistake about it, you were drawn away of your own lust. No man arrives at the end by tripping down the stairs. I think about Achan. There's 4 verbs we see in Achan in Joshua 7:21. Notice this was not a once thing. This was something, it was a process that took place. And in Joshua 7:21, it says, when I saw among the spoils a good Babylonish garment, and 200 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold of 50 shekels weight, then I coveted them, and took them, And behold, they are hid in the earth in the midst of my tent, and the silver under it. He saw, he coveted, he took, and then he hid. See, the first three are theft. The fourth one is where the fall came. Because that's where a sin became a structure, a stronghold that had maintained. And notice what it cost in Joshua 7, verse 11 and 12. Israel had sinned, and it says this, therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies. They lost the defenses. They lost the ability to stand to fight this battle. And as a result, 36 men died at the Battle of Ai over something that one man just buried in his tent. Some private sin led to public casualties, which, by the way, is the answer when anybody says, well, this issue is just between me and God. It's amazing how many issues between me and God affect those around me. It affects your children, visiting the iniquities of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. It affects communities and societies and families and churches. Let me tell you, this little secret sin of these preachers we're talking about, it impacted entire congregations. Think about David. David is a tremendous example of both a fall and of restoration. He's the one that everybody knows about, but we never really break it down and dissect it. Step one isn't the roof. Step one was being derelict in his duties. 2 Samuel 11, verse number 1, and it came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when the kings go forth to battle. It says there that, but David tarried still at Jerusalem. This is a time where he had a duty to uphold, to go to battle, but he stayed. David was not beaten. He simply wasn't there. He was valiant in battle for years, but he neglected the one battle that he was supposed to fight. So in 2 Samuel 11:2, it says, and it came to pass that at eventide, that David arose off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. Keep in mind when he was supposed to be out of battle. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. And David sent and inquired after the woman, and one said, is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? See, the first glance, the seeing her bathing herself might have been an accident, but inquiring after her was not. And look at the answer that was given to him. The answer was, she is married. And not only is she married, but she's married to one of your most faithful men, David. Uriah was one of his mighty men. He had all the facts that he needed to stop, to make the right decision. By the way, other people were involved. This was not just done in secret. Verse number 4, it says, and David sent messengers and took her, and she came in unto him, and he lay with her. And what takes place after this was that she conceives with his son. So he tries to cover it up, and he calls Uriah. Uriah, come and tell me how the battle's going. He gets Uriah good and drunk, and he says, now go and be with your wife, and then we'll send you out to the battle in the morning. Instead, being a faithful servant, faithful to his own men, he said, how can I enjoy this R&R while my men are still at battle? So he just stayed at the steps of the palace. He had more integrity while he was drunk than David had in his rested sobriety state. And so it says in verse 15, and he wrote in a letter saying, set ye Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. Let me just say, that is cold-blooded murder covered up on the battlefield. See, between verses 4 and 15, we see the cover-ups. Bring Uriah home, get him drunk, and when the concealing of the sin fails, we escalate even further forward. So the man was killed to protect a secret that David refused to confess. Then there came about a year of silence at this point, until finally the prophet Nathan comes to him. Now keep in mind, this was a year, the man after God's own heart, the sweet psalmist of Israel, had no fellowship with God, no communion with the Lord. And so God sends the prophet Nathan to confront him. Finally, he starts pouring it all out, and we get 2 psalms from it. And one of them is in Psalm 32, verse 3 and 4. When I kept silent, he said, my bones waxed old through my roaring all the day long. For day and night thy hand was heavy upon me. My moisture is returned into the drought of summer, Selah. See, he was still king. He was still judging Israel. He was still ruling for about a year. But he didn't repent till Nathan came to him. We see these were all repeated conscious decisions all the way down. Why do these temptations grab a hold of us? Well, it's a snare. Let me show you the mechanism underneath all of this, because Paul names it twice in two verses that are directly linked to the pastoral qualifications. 1 Timothy 3, 6 and 7 says that he should not be a novice, lest being lifted up with pride, get this now, he fall into condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Two different falls. The first one is internal, pride. The second fall is external. And look at who renders the verdict. It says, of them that are without. So he gets to the point where those that are outside the church, I think about the internet today, I think about the Preacher Boy podcast, I think about all these other things, they are all seeing this reproach. Paul makes a man's reputation outside the church a qualification for standing inside the church. That's such an important thing. We overlook that qualification many times, by the way. See, the pulpit is not where a man is tested. It's in private. And so here's where the snare is. A snare is hidden. If he could see it, he would simply just walk around it. A snare is typically baited. He was drawn away with his own lust. It's usually with something that he wants. Nobody is caught by a trap baited with something that's repulsive. A snare doesn't chase after him. He's not running away from anything. It has no legs. It can't pursue. He comes to the snare. A snare doesn't kill on contact. It holds you. As the creature that is caught in the snare is thrashing around, it tightens its grip and tightens its grip. And then a snare is usually set by someone who has studied the animal. Can I just say, you have an enemy and he has studied you. He knows what those temptations are. He knows what those lusts are, the right temptation to put before you. Ephesians 6:11, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Proverbs 7:22 and 23, it says, he goeth after her straightway, as an ox goeth to the slaughter, as a bird hasteth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is for his life. See, the bird isn't walking, the bird is hastening, he's going full-fledged towards it, and does not know. It says that is what this man has done. 1 Timothy 6:9. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Same kind of construction here. They fall into a snare, and what ends up happening? They drown. Now, these are people that their desire, they will be rich. Their desire, that's the thing that's motivating, that's their pursuit of life. What ends up happening? They're going to be snares that play into the will, the desire to be rich. And what happens? They fall into the snare. And what does that snare do? It pulls them down and they drown. It's progressive submersion. It's not a single splash. They got so far, they played with it so much that it gripped them, and now it's got a hold of them. You know, what's interesting is we talk a lot about the discipline in the Christian life to keep us away from sin, but there's a discipline that is connected to sin. 2 Peter 2:14 says, having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin. That's called an addiction. You can't stop. Beguiling unstable souls and heart, they have exercised with covetous practices, cursed children. The word there, exercised, is where we get the root word there, is where we get the word gymnasium. It's working out, it's exercising language. In other words, it's a trained heart. It's a heart that has been trained into this thing. That is what you do from repetition. It's a rehearsed heart. It puts repetition over and over and over again to where it's second nature, to where it doesn't even require decision anymore. That's what we call an addiction. See, nobody trains by accident. It's something you kept doing, and you kept doing, and you kept doing, till you didn't even think about it. You didn't think of the consequences. You didn't think of who's involved or who it impacts. Sin has its own disciplines, and a man practices them in private until they become automatic. There are two roads now, and don't let them merge. On road one, we have the defiled imagination. Job 31:1, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a mate? Psalm 101:3, I will set no wicked thing before mine eyes. I hate the works of them that turn aside. They shall not cleave to me. Proverbs 4:23, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Over and over again, Matthew 15:19, for out of the heart pour the evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornication, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. Genesis 6:5, every imagination of the heart, thoughts of the heart was evil continually. We have these cautions over and over again of what goes on in the imagination or the heart. But then when that is unchecked, We have road 2, the abused office. This office has access, it has trust, it has secrecy. And what happened in this situation, there was a private channel to a child. We have to keep the roads separate. These are not the same thing. There are some defiling things that take place in the heart that we have to check it, we have to deal with that with God. But as soon as we let that heart to flow outward, we are going to find ourselves in trouble. You see, grooming is not lust. It's the overflow. Grooming is deliberate. It's cultivation of trust and secrecy with a specific child in mind or a specific act in mind. If I allow those two roads to merge, I'd be suggesting that the private sin caused this public action. Now, what I want to be careful with is I'm not giving a pass for those private sins to keep them unchecked. But I can't say that this addiction led to this. I'm not going to say the predator was a victim in any way. I don't know what these men's private lives were like. I will say this with certainty, with confidence, that something in their private life was lacking. See, all I know is what Scripture says is in every man. There's a deceitful heart. There are these cautions to guard your heart, to keep your heart. Why? Because if unchecked, it will spill out. And it goes from internal eventually to external. And of course, what Luke 17:2 says of the man who offends a child, it were better for him that a millstone be hanged about his neck and then he cast into the sea than that he should offend one of these little ones. That's a better judgment for him than what he's going to face. See, he didn't merely fall, he took a child down with him. This millstone verse comes from Christ. It's a very important thing to understand that this is how serious God takes these matters. Notice Romans 1, we're talking about the fall, we're talking about the steps downward, a degradation. Romans 1 is a tremendous pattern of that, but notice what God's response is on the way down. I'm not going to read all the passages, but in Romans 1:24, it says, "Wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves." Verse 26, "For this cause God gave them up to vile affections." Verse 28, "Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do the things which are not convenient." The word not convenient carries the idea of does not produce fruit, is not fruitful. Reprobate mind, tried and being found worthless. And so we have God gave them up, God gave them up, and God gave them over. See, 3 times, each time was God's response. Wherefore, for this cause, even as they did not like to retain God. Judicial abandonment follows persistent refusal. God gave them over. That's not just arbitrary. This is the steps down. God takes the handrails away and one section at a time until the person falls headlong. Now here's the bottom, the very end of the chapter. "Who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death." That alone is enough. But then it says, "Not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them." They're not participating and enjoying others that do. And the bottom step isn't just doing it yourself, but the bottom step is enjoying it in somebody else. Now, if that's not a predator, I don't know what is. Now, a very sobering verse to consider is Judges 16:20, talking about Samson. "And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him." God gave him over. He didn't know it. He fully expected the power of God to be there. He had a track record and a plan and confidence. A man can step out in his own strength. He can keep running mechanically. He can go on ministry momentum. But at some point, you're going to realize that power of God's not present. I am not walking in God's blessing. I've been given over. Now, some might hear that and say, well, it sounds like fate. He started here and just kept going down and down and down and down. It's not. There is always a way out. 1 Corinthians 10:13, "There is no temptation taking you." By the way, we talked about Romans 10 already, about taking heed lest you fall. The next verse, "There is no temptation taking you, but such as is common to man." Why does it land there? Because he says, if you think you stand, take heed lest you fall, because the temptation is the same. "There is no temptation taking you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it." There was a way out at every single step. Think about David upon the roof. It's not the first look that gets you, it's the lingering look that gets you. He then inquired. He got more information. Now, if that doesn't challenge his integrity, I don't know what will. See, it was one seemingly innocent phone number. Maybe I shouldn't be talking to a teenage boy as a grown man. That first message, this is going in a direction it probably shouldn't be going. At the 100th message, how far down am I going to go with this thing? So that's the road down. Now I have to do the hard part and turn this around. Why did I say, but by the grace of God there will go I? Or why did I say this could be any one of us? Because Paul did not write 1 Corinthians 10:12 about a man who had already fallen. He wrote it about the man who is still standing. He wrote it about you who are condemning this man. He wrote to me looking on at those who have fallen into such destruction and asking the question, how did they get there? I would never go that far, or whatever it would be. So here's the warning. I want you to see a couple of words, because the words that we're discussing are actually military words. We're going to see two very important military words, the word stand and the word fall. Here's something I didn't realize till I kind of chased it down, and it changed how I read these verses. The Hebrew word for fall is nephal. It's ordinary standard word for battle casualties. The battlefield is where the word is pulled from. 1 Samuel 31:1, and the men of Israel fled from the Philistines and fell down slain. Judges 20, verse 46, so that all fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000 men. 1 Samuel 4:10, there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. Numbers 14:29, your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness. I think about David's lament 3 times in one chapter in 2 Samuel 1 in verse 19. The beauty of Israel is slain upon the high places. How are the mighty fallen? Verse 25, how are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? Verse 27, how are the mighty fallen and the weapons of war perished? By the way, each of those verses are an exclamation mark at the end, not a question mark. It's a statement. How the mighty have fallen. Now watch this. Because this is where it stops being an illustration and actually becomes proper exegesis of the scriptures. Saul's fall was literally a military death. But here's how scripture interprets it. In 1 Chronicles 10:13-14, it says, so Saul died, get this now, for his transgression which he committed against the Lord, even against the word of the Lord which he kept not, and also for asking counsel of one that had a familiar spirit to inquire of it, and inquired not of the Lord, therefore he slew him. See, the Bible reads the battlefield defeat as the end of a moral descent. So let's look at it. Unlawful sacrifice in chapter 13. Partial obedience of Amalek in chapter 15, the javelin in 18, years of hunting David instead of the Philistines, then the witch of Endor in chapter 28, the man who cut off familiar spirits from the land then goes and consults one, then he is taken. The spiritual battle that was lost caused him to be slain physically or to fall physically. Can I just say that's the exact same thing? The fall was not that the police found out. The fall was not that he was arrested. The fall was not imprisonment. That's not the fall. That is the natural consequences of the fall that took place spiritually. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. And that's what took place. So we see fall, military term. The other military word is stand. That's the opposite of fall, is to stand. Ephesians 6:11. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. See, there is a devil. There's no questioning that. But our duty is to stand. And we have everything that at our disposal to stand. Verse 13, having done all to stand. Verse 14, stand therefore, having your loins girded about with truth. 3 times in the spiritual armor passage, it never says win. It never says victory. It says to stand. See, that's a defensive posture. It assumes a man is already under fire and he is going to do everything he can to stand his ground. Proverbs 24:28. He that hath no rule over his spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. See, a city without walls does not have to be conquered by an enemy, by a military might. Nobody has to storm it. All they have to do is walk in. There's no walls. There's no defense up. Deuteronomy 25, verse 18. And he met thee by the way, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God. Notice Amalek does not hit the front line. He picks off the man from the back. It says that he hit him in the hindmost when he was feeble, when he was faint and weary, and he feared not God. See, he goes after the alone, the tired, the isolated. I'm just too tired to fight. That's where David was. I'm going to sit back this one. I know it's the time when the kings go forth to battle, but I'm going to stay back. He stays back. Maybe he got a good night rest. He goes up on top of his rooftop, stretches a little bit, looks over, and sees a beautiful woman bathing herself. And there he didn't grab a hold of something very important. 2 Corinthians 10:3-5 says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. God gives us the ability to do so. What are you going to do with the imaginations? Are you going to stay there? Are you going to dwell? Are you going to cast them down? Are you going to grab a hold of them and surrender them to Christ? The engagement is fought at the level of thought. That's step one. Now, military language, if we're not careful, can imply that a man was overrun by superior force, overwhelmed, outnumbered. The devil attacked him. How many times do we hear that? The devil made me do it. And so we need to be careful here. This was not a garrison that was overwhelmed by superior army. This was a city whose walls were never repaired, whose gates just stood wide open. And the enemy didn't have to breach anything. He walked right in the gap. The watchman had known about this gap for years. And this is where he finds himself. Now, some people say this, well, sin is sin. We shouldn't be judging this particular sin because we all have our own sin. But I want to be very careful as we look at that, because this is one of the things that makes people just simply not trust us, not trust churches. That's not consistent with Scripture. Luke 17:2, it were better for him that a millstone be hanged about his neck. There's a condition here that it's better for him. There's a more extreme a view of this, more extreme judgment. John 19:11, therefore he that delivered me unto thee hath the greater sin. There's a greater sin in John 19. Ezekiel 8:6, thou shalt see greater abominations. There are lesser abominations and a greater abominations apparently. Luke 12:47-48, and that servant which knew his Lord's will shall be beaten with many stripes, but he that knew not shall be beaten with few stripes. There's a measure of the judgment on him because of what he knew versus the one who didn't know much. See, when we kind of flatten the judgment that all sins have the same weight, that's not being humble, it's being unbiblical. Jesus distinguished these things, and we ought to also. Even when you look in the Old Testament and the judgments of God, there are certain things that carry a heavier penalty. There are capital crimes that are worthy of death. There are other crimes that just simply demand a sacrifice and so forth. Now notice Galatians 6:1, I mentioned this earlier. It says, consider thyself, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, you which are spiritual, restore such an one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. God commands us to be suspicious. He commands self-suspicion in the exact context of a man who's been overtaken by a fault. Consider thyself. See, that's not weakness, that's humility. This isn't enabling, it's not a dodge, it's an imperative. 1 Corinthians 4:7, for who maketh thee to differ from another, and what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, who can know it? So, but by the grace of God there go I is a true statement, but it could be in the wrong mouth at the wrong time. It's a statement that should never be said to a victim. It should never be an argument for leniency on the predator. It's what a man says to God about himself on his knees after he's already said that was a wicked thing. Yes, prosecute him. Yes, protect the children. But to have the right heart to say, God, where am I off? See, having the right doctrine with the wrong sequence is how the church has earned a bad reputation. We must fix the order. The order demands the call for justice, for protection, for understanding, admitting what was wrong. There's time for the other things, but we must get the order right. Now, let's look at the posture of someone who's on guard, of a watcher. Notice this passage in Proverbs 24. In Proverbs 24, verse number 16, He says, "For a just man falleth 7 times and riseth up again, but the wicked shall fall into mischief." You have 2 men falling. One, there's a window of repentance, and he gets up. The other falls into mischief. It becomes a lifestyle. He makes excuses, and he stays there. But notice what it says in verse number 17. "Rejoice not when thy enemy falleth, and let not thy heart be glad when he stumbleth, lest the Lord see it, and it displease him." What a tremendous statement. Same passage, same word, fall. But then Solomon goes straight from the nature of one who's falling to one who's just standing and watching someone else fall. And notice what was forbidden. Not justice, not accountability, not reporting, not prosecuting, not warning other people. What's forbidden is gladness. The sin is a heart that is glad. To rejoice, oh, another preacher fell. Oh, another one bites the dust. We got to be so careful. Now, Paul, oftentimes, he judged very publicly, and he judged by name. In 1 Corinthians 5, he pointed out this couple that's living in sin. He says, "I've judged already." He tells them, you guys need to judge. You're puffed up in your lack of judgment. We see in other places, he lists people's names and so forth. So in 1 Corinthians 5:12, he commands this judgment. So here's the model. 2 Samuel 1:11 and 12, "Then David took hold his clothes and rent them." It says, "And they mourned and wept and fasted until even for Saul. When he found out King Saul was dead, he mourned over him, because they were fallen by the sword." Now here's the man that was deserving of it, in a sense. He was David's enemy. He could have cheered. That's the one he was in battle with. But he mourns for him. His enemy, the one who threw javelins at him and hunted him through the wilderness for years, and David tore his clothes. But what's interesting is what happens next. There's a man that comes along, and he tries to take credit for killing King Saul. And it says this in 2 Samuel 1:15 and 16, "And David called one of the young men and said, Go near and fall upon him. And he smote him that he died. And David said unto him, Thy blood be upon thy head." So on the one hand, he mourned for his enemy. But on the other hand, he called for judgment. Now, I want to say this. We should mourn for the fallen. We should mourn first and foremost for the victim. We should mourn for the fallen, but we must demand justice. Justice without gladness, not vindictive. With a broken heart, just as God is brokenhearted when he has to exercise justice because he is just. I'm not pointing any of this at people who are angry. Anger at the sexual abuse of a child is a proper emotion. I share that frustration. The danger is not condemning this too loudly. The danger here is the certainty that this couldn't be you, that you would never fall in a similar manner. Those are two different things. The survivor can be furious, but he can also be humble at the same time. A preacher can be furious and dead certain he's immune to that thing, and watch out, those are the same ones that we're probably going to read about next week. It's the certainty, it's not the fury that Paul warns about. So a couple hard lines before we go. One, demanding justice is Christian. Romans 13:4, "And he forbeareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, or avenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil." Calling the police is not failure of grace, it's obedience. In fact, stepping in saying, the church is God, it is actually a violation of Scripture. God does not give the sword of vengeance to the church. God gives the sword of the Spirit to the church. The sword of vengeance belongs to the government. And that's a very important thing, that he's a minister of God for good. Secondly, when we talk about restoration, we should be concerned about restoration to Christ, not restoration to an office, or even restoration to usefulness. That may or may not come, but that should never be the goal. The goal is his walk with God. So 1 Timothy 3:2, "The bishop then must be blameless." Listen, as long as this is hanging over, you're not blameless. You're going to bring a reproach to the name of Christ to try to give someone a path back to that position if we're not careful. You see, that's a qualification verse, not a probationary type thing. Forgiveness never erases the consequence. It didn't do it for David. 2 Samuel 12:10, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house." David still was useful for the Lord, but he was never fully restored. There were still consequences. I also want to say this. David was not a pastor. David was a king. And we need to make sure we are keeping those things separate, because if we're not careful, we look at it and say, well, look at God kept using David in the kingdom for his purposes. And listen, it's not the same thing. Okay? It's a great example. It's a great illustration, but it's not the same thing. 2 Samuel 13:21. What had taken place was David had some kids. He had a son named Amnon, and Amnon's half-sister, David's daughter, named Tamar, and Amnon had an unhealthy attraction to his half-sister. He puts together this plan to basically where he violates his sister. And this is very interesting because it says this, but when King David heard of all these things, he was very wroth. Notice the language and what it says and what it doesn't say. He got angry, but that's all we're told it did. See, a man who doesn't deal with his own sin, he loses standing to confront it in his own house, to confront it around others. That's a very important thing to consider. By the way, it tore his house apart. What ended up happening, because David didn't deal with Amnon, David's other son kills Amnon, and then later tries to take over his own kingdom. And then the third hard line is this. Covering up is just another step downward. It doesn't fix anything. This one is really aimed at churches, not the offenders. It's a little bit of a harder one because concealing a scandal, it may feel righteous. It may feel like you're doing the right thing. I actually heard when one preacher from years ago, his sin was brought to the attention of another prominent preacher, and he said, we cannot let this get out. You know what that would do to the cause of Christ? Let me just say, nobody is too powerful. Nobody is too big to where God just absolutely needs him. You see, nobody covers for a man thinking that they're being wicked. They think they're protecting a testimony. They think they're protecting a ministry, a family, the young converts. We need to be so careful that we are honest and open and we deal with things properly and biblically. And quite frankly, it earns people's trust to do it the right way. Proverbs 28:13, he that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. We have two options. There is the covering of sin, and then there's the openness of sin. Which one are we going to do? Numbers 32:23, be sure your sin will find you out. Luke 12:2-3, there's nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known. Therefore, whatsoever ye have spoken in darkness shall be heard in the light, and that which ye have spoken in the ear, in the closets, shall be proclaimed upon the housetop. In 2026, Housetop is a podcast. It's a YouTube reel. It's social media. It's a court docket. It's a documentary. But can I just say it always comes out? It has always come out. The only variable is whether the church told the truth first or they got caught. If they decide to get ahead of it, or they're going to let it linger for several weeks, and by the time we realize there's no getting ahead of this, now we will give a statement, and he will dance around the topic. But that brings us back to where we started. His church took 9 days before they say anything, and it's something like this. Pray for the pastor. He's dealing with some battles. He's struggling with COVID. Listen, report first. If there's an accusation, we must report it. Investigate second. Well, we handled it internally has ended more churches than any other scandal. It's blown confidence in people saying, we take passages like the least among you should be able to judge these matters, and we think, this is what we're talking about. No, when we're talking about criminal matters, that belongs in the civil realm. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, render unto God that which is God's. So let me close where Jesus closed. 2 houses, but the same storm. And so here's my challenge. What are you built on? Now, we know this song from Sunday school, but in Matthew 7:24-27, therefore, whosoever heareth the sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rains descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon the house, and it fell not. For it was founded upon a rock. And everyone that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them shall not be likened unto a foolish man which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon the house, and the house fell. Get this now, and great was the fall of it. It was not a little one-time thing. It was a great fall. Notice the wording, because they're identical. In verse 25 and in verse 27. Word for word, they're the same. The same rain came, the same floods came, the same winds, the same beating against the house. See, Jesus removes the excuse of, well, this temptation was too great. The storm was too great. Nobody can blame the storm. The difference between the two was the foundation that was underneath it. See, the temptation is not the issue. Both houses were hit. One stood, one fell. Now, what's interesting is those houses were likened unto a man, a wise man and a foolish man, but the illustration was a house likened to a man. Now, what's interesting about that passage is what comes right before it. Matthew 7, verse 21 to 23. Many will say to me that day, Lord, Lord, have I not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that worketh iniquity. Then it goes into the illustration of the houses. They had a public ministry. They even experienced real results, but there was no foundation. There was the sand builder. He is a hearer, but not a doer. He was in the room. He heard the words, but he didn't do them. Now, I can't tell you which house this was. I can't tell you if the man was saved, if he was lost. Nobody can. So why was the fall described as great? The fall was great not in how big the fall was, but how high the fall came from. He's giving the illustration of this house. It was a great descent. James 3:1, my brethren, be not many masters, knowing we shall receive the greater condemnation. Talking about those who lead, those who teach, those who preach. Luke 12:48, for unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they shall ask the more. See, a man who preached across the country and even abroad, he didn't fall from ground level. We have the expression, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Now, it's very important. We talk about the foundations. In 1 Corinthians 3, Paul challenges us, take heed how you build thereupon. It says, no other foundation can any man lay than that which is laid, the Lord Christ Jesus. In verse 10, it says, but let every man take heed how he buildeth thereupon. Matthew 7 asks the question, is there a foundation at all? And the answer is either it's going to stand or it collapses. 1 Corinthians 3 asks a different question, what are you building with? 1 Corinthians 3, verse 12 and 13. Now, if any man build upon this foundation gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest or brought to light. For the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. See, man can be genuinely saved, genuinely called, building with material that won't survive contact with fire. In 1 Corinthians 3:17, if any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. See, nobody builds a house on sand in an afternoon. He hauls it in one bucket at a time for many years. And every single bucket, it just felt like nothing. One little compromise, one little sin, one little thing here and there. That's why the Bible says, take heed lest ye fall. Not take heed lest you sin. You already sin. The question is what you do with that sin afterward. Because unchecked sin doesn't stay as a one-time event. It's repeated, it's gymnasiumed, as we saw, and it becomes a foundation. This is where it must cost something. This particular issue that prompted this podcast has been all over social media and so forth. It started with an exchange of phone numbers. And this is to churches, this is to pastors, this is to Christian leaders. Make sure in your church you have a written policy. No adult in private one-on-one conversation with a minor, ever. No exception for a visiting preacher. This cuts off even step one. Not at the end when the damage is already done and the church is in the news and the name is already tarnished. At the beginning, when it costs nothing, but just a little bit of inconvenience and a signature. I've been working on ours actually for our insurance purposes, but here's Cornerstone Baptist Church sexual misconduct and child protection policy. And I'm going through it, and after this event, I'm actually adding to it this idea of, listen, adults and minors don't need to be talking together, not in private, not without including a parent in there and so forth. Many churches out there don't even have any kind of policy, so put together a written child protection policy. Adopt it, enforce it, no exceptions for staff, for guest speakers. Put together a rule. There's no adult with a child together in a room without another adult. No private digital channels between adults and minors ever. Background checks on everyone who touches children's ministry. Have people in your life with standing to ask you hard questions. Make sure those things are right. Now, not having these things in place, that was no excuse for anything that took place. These are just some extra protections that we can put up. So if you're thinking I'm trying to make an excuse, no, I'm not. I'm showing you where the snare is set. I'm showing you where the wire is so you can cut it, and so we can protect ourselves. We talk about walking in the grace of God. The difference between these steps is the grace of God. This is the part I think we've stopped preaching. That grace is not only for the day that you got saved. It's the whole reason when I say, but for the grace of God. Titus 2:11 and 12, for the grace of God which bringeth salvation, the grace that saved me, hath appeared to all men, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world. See, grace doesn't only save, grace teaches us. And what it teaches is how to live in this present world. Philippians 2:12 and 13. Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. I like to use verse 13 and say, this is the grace of God. This is the definition for the grace of God in my day-to-day living. But we have both halves. God worketh in you. That's the grace. And then it says, work out with fear and trembling. The grace of God is not just for the internal, it's something that must be worked outward. It comes out. Hebrews 12:1, let's lay aside every weight and the sinners does so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. We all have a besetting sin. Every one of us has something that entangles us, that we struggle with. And the text assumes you know what yours is. It says, lay it aside. Step outside that daily practical grace, neglect it, presume upon it, quit asking for God's grace, and you're going to be the man on the staircase with no handrail. You're going to be the next headline. You're going to be the next one that fell. These are the cautions. So here's the door. I'm preaching to the man that is on the second step, not the man at the bottom, because the man on the bottom, he's not listening to the podcast. The man on that second step, he's got something private. Nobody knows about this. He's told himself that he's got it contained. Can I just say it's not contained? It's a foundation that you are pouring. Proverbs 24:16, for a just man falleth 7 times. Hey, yet riseth up again. Get back on the first step and then get off the staircase. The rising is the whole difference. 7 times he rises. He stumbled again. He fell again. He went down again. But he rose. 7. The just man is not the man who never went down. He's the man who saw his frailty and got up. He never stayed down. Psalm 51:1 and 2. Have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy loving kindness, according to the multitude of thy tender mercies. Blot out my transgressions. This is what David prayed after his sin, after his fall. Wash me thoroughly from mine iniquities and cleanse me from my sin. Verse 10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Psalm 51 is still a tremendous outline, a tremendous picture of what repentance looks like. But understand who wrote it. Here's a man who got cornered with a prophetic finger in his face before he prayed it. You don't have to wait till Nathan comes to you. You don't have to wait till the cops show up at your door. Turn now. Take the escape now. Jude 24 says, now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. See, if God is able to keep you from falling, then apart from his keeping, apart from his grace, can I just say, you will fall. That's the doctrine behind, but by the grace of God, there go I. This isn't a dodge. This isn't platitude. It is a humble admission that I need God's grace in my life. It's Jude 24 in the first person. Unto him that is able to keep you from falling. Hey, I hope that's a help to you. I know this is a heavier episode than I typically deal with, but I just feel like it had to be put out there. And understand, fall is biblical language. Fall is a cautionary language, because this is a cautionary tale. And we keep hearing it over and over again. We ought to understand how we get to that place and how we can look to God who will keep you from falling. Hope that's a help to you, and we'll see you next time.
We hope this episode was a blessing to you. If you have any questions, comments, topic suggestions, or even disagreements, Aaron would love to hear from you. Please feel free to contact him at www.unfeigned.life. Thank you for taking the time to listen. And remember 1 Timothy 1:5. Now the end of the commandment is charity out of a pure heart, and of a good conscience, and of faith unfeigned. Until next time, keep your faith real to the glory of God.